The Women's World Championship final has just begun, and over the next two videos I'm going to show you the first two games. So we have the title holder, Wenjun, she's 32 years old, against the challenger Lei Tingjie, she's 26 years old, and both are from China. In this first game, Lei had white. Now, normally she's a d4 player and quite solid. Likes quite strategic games, quite positional. I think of Wenjun as being more inclined to attack. But the first surprise came on the first move, e4 from Lei. And Wenjun plays in classical manner and goes with e5, and it's a Spanish. And Wenjun plays knight f6. Okay, it's the Berlin. It's not a huge surprise. You know, in these World Championship matches, this is only 12 games. And you can't risk a great deal. It's worth playing solid, sound openings. And the Berlin is certainly that. But Lei obviously came to the board well prepared, because she had prepared a little surprise. Now, instead of d4 going into the endgame, she played rook e1. Okay, that's normal. And here, black really should put the knight back on d6. And there's a trick here. Of course, you want to play knight f6. You don't want to block in this bishop. The problem with this is that after knight takes and knight e5, d4 is a really strong move. That's why the knight can't go back to f6 and why it goes to d6, which is really suboptimal because it blocks in the bishop. And this is why, even though the pawn structure is symmetrical, white has a little advantage here. So obviously there are threats on the open e file with knight takes, so that has to be blocked. Bishop is attacked, so it drops back to f1. So this is the modern way of playing. You know, in times past, the bishop was always put on d3. I think that's due for a revival, actually. In any case, bishop f1 was played. It's sensible because you want to play d4, and that's why the knights are exchanged and black castles. So if black can successfully remove the knight and play d6 or d5, then black shouldn't have any problems. But it's clear that white's development, white's pieces are just a bit freer than black's. So everything normal so far. And here black has a big choice. You can either play knight f5, but even on f5 it's not the ideal square, or you can play rook e8. So that's what Wenjun did. This is absolutely normal. And the most popular choice here is to exchange rooks. And then black gets in d5 and slowly but surely unwinds in this position. But instead of that, Lei very quickly played knight c3. Now that is an unusual move. I mean, hundreds of games have been played with rook takes rook. Knight c3 is quite rare because it involves a pawn sacrifice. So rook takes, queen takes, and bishop takes d4. Well, it's nice that white has developed peace. That's the good news. The bad news is that black has taken a pawn. But then again, in taking the pawn, it means that black hasn't tackled the basic problem in this position, which is queenside development. Knight gets in the way. The pawn is blocked by the knight. This pawn also hasn't moved. This bishop is also a little bit loose. And here bishop f4 has been played, but bishop d3 is, well, looks very sound. The bishop is pointing at the slightly sensitive pawn on h7. So a pawn sacrifice, and here is where Wenjun had a little bit of a think. I mean, let me just illustrate the potential problems that black has if black tries to sort things out, moving the knight, and then you want to move this pawn out. white has queen e4, attacking the pawn and attacking the bishop. So you can see that bishop on d4 potentially loose. So Zhu plays, I think, a very pragmatic move. Just exchanging off that knight, which could also leap into d5. So exchanging pieces is not a bad idea if you're a pawn up. And yeah, gets rid of that loose bishop as well. And here knight e8 played. So the knight drops back. It doesn't really have a better place to go to. But black is now ready to move the d-pawn 1 or 2 squares and then bring the bishop into play. But now white has 2 bishops. That's potentially dangerous. And b3 played, wanting to put the bishop on the long diagonal with this nice battery with bishop and queen. So this is potentially quite dangerous. And now here black has a fundamental choice. Do you play d6 or do you play d5? Have a little think. Which one would you go for? Which is the most sound move in this position? Wenjun went for d5, and I think that's certainly the most pragmatic move. d6 has been played a couple of times. Jorn van Foreest has faced this a couple of times. He played this pawn sacrifice with white. But this can lead to real difficulties. Let me just show you this game against Sadhwani, decent opponent. Bishop b2. Now, the queen is pointing here, although that's defended at the moment. Bishop d7. And now a very nice move. Queen b4. In fact, the goal isn't really attacking on the queen side. It's to switch to the king side. This is an excellent maneuver. And now bishop c3 with the idea rook e1. So I repeat, this is the game van Foreest against Sadhwani. This did not happen in the match, but the game ended very, very quickly. Well, here, I mean, basically, if the queen goes back, then rook e3. I mean, you can see that all white's pieces are in play. This rook is about to swing to g3. I mean, this is actually a winning attack for white. Crucially, that rook has not been able to get into the game. In the game, it went knight d5, hitting the queen, but bishop h7 was a winning move. Yeah, I mean, that's fatal. If king takes bishop, then queen f5 check, followed by rook takes queen. g6 allows queen h3 and mate on h8. So that's just a little illustration that if black plays very modestly with d6, it can go really badly wrong. I think the problem with this is that although it looks very sound to keep a nice compact pawn structure, you can see that black's pieces are really restricted after that. So I think d5 by Zhu is actually the best move here, because it does give black the option to play the knight in here. It takes away a couple of squares as well. Bishop f4. This is the downside of playing d5. You can see that without a pawn on d6, then this bishop is looking good down here. Bishop e6, rook e1. So white's pieces have really come into play very quickly, and black is still really to develop the pieces off the back rank. Queen d7. Now this is interesting. a4. So this is just slowly creeping down the board. If this is blocked, then, well, that's potentially a liability. The bishop might come here at some point. So Zhu plays, I think, a very pragmatic move. Knight d6. Rook e3. So danger. This rook wants to swing across here, and this is already extremely tricky. So excellent move from Zhu now. Pragmatic move. She thought for almost 20 minutes over knight e4. It's giving back the extra pawn, but actually it's necessary. One little trick, if bishop takes knight, then d4. And the rook is lost. But queen takes c7. So white has taken back the pawn. So level material, but in this endgame, I think it's pretty clear that white is striving for the advantage because white has the advantage of 2 bishops and a superior pawn structure. There's an isolated pawn on d5. Not that it's in this position particularly weak. But yeah, maybe the square in front of that pawn is a slight problem. Knight c5. Well, if the knight manages to take the bishop, then with opposite colour bishops, black will have no difficulties. So in order to maintain any kind of advantage, it's necessary to keep the 2 bishops in this position. Certainly the opposite colour bishop endgame would present black with no difficulties. Bishop f5 is an interesting move here, but rook c8 played, which I certainly think is not a bad move. I mean, it's aiming at this pawn here, so this gives black a little bit of counterplay. Bishop e5. Knight d7. Excellent move. Opening up the c-file, so bishop d3. End got quite a tense middle game. It's, well, I'm calling it a middle game. It's an end game. The queens are off the board, but there's still quite a lot going on here. If you were playing black, how would you play in this position? This is, I think, already quite important. Black to play. What's best? You have a think, I'll have a drink. Cheers. I think the best move is to exchange off that beautiful dark-squared bishop. Now, although this is one of those classic good bishops against bad bishop positions, and, you know, with this isolated pawn restricting the bishop on e6, I think black can hold this without difficulty. And there's a key reason for this. If the king can reach d6 and head into the middle, then I think black is very solid here. You can't play king f8 immediately. I'm going to go into a little bit of detail here. This is a really important position. King f8 immediately is no good because the bishop takes pawn. And if g6, that can just be taken, so you can't trap the bishop. This one is loose. But first of all, black plays a really important move. You have to do something about this pawn. Now, don't go h6, because that will allow f4 and then f5, and that king is not going to be able to get to the middle, and that pawn is loose. But you play g6, which is counterintuitive because it puts the pawn on a light square, same colour as this bishop, but it's actually fine. So the idea is still to transfer the king to the middle. f4, anyway, king f8, king f2, king e7. Now this is a really important position because if white's king can reach d4, then I think white can claim a big positional advantage. Classic good bishop against bad bishop blockading the IQP. The problem is king e3 is met by f6 and that rook is trapped. This is the big issue in the position. So first of all, that rook needs to come back. But now the king gets there. And after king e3, king c5 prevents the king from reaching d4. And because of that, I think black is absolutely fine here. So for example, after c3, there's even a really nice move eliminating that IQP. And then king b4, this one is going to drop. Well, I think this one could even turn in black's favour. I mean, this is a very interesting position. So if you wanted to play knight takes bishop, well done. But it relies on tactical nuances. Otherwise, black could just be seriously positionally worse. And this is very typical. It's impossible to generalize in chess. We can all see that white has a good bishop against a bad bishop, but here the transfer of the king into the middle actually equalizes the position for black. But instead, knight c5 was played. Well, I mean, this is certainly not a bad move. I think just knight takes bishop was clearer. And now instead of bishop f1, bishop e2. So Lei is playing for the win here. Knight came back to d7. Bishop d3 would repeat the position. But bishop c3, so that closes off the c file. Now I'm going to shoot forward. a6, h4. White starts to gain some ground on the king's side. If the position kind of remains as it is, then I think white is doing pretty well here. Knight f8, g4. So this is the start of a squeeze on the king's side. And I mean, this is very pleasant. I mean, white has two things here. You certainly want to advance these pawns. In combination with the bishops and the rook, it could be very good. You also want to bring the king to d2, which would really secure white's position. Now, do you have time to do all these things? That's the question. f5 was played, and that's a mistake. This is a big moment in the game, actually. So this is a bit of a panicky move from Zhu. So what should white play in this position? Lei took on f5, and white certainly has some advantage there, but bishop b4 is the best move here, and that puts black under massive pressure. Obviously the threat is to exchange off bishop for knight and take here. And let's say king f7. Well, that can be taken. And now the rook goes in. Well, obviously white breaking through here looks pretty good. And this is actually very good for white. The connected passed pawns with the bishops look good. But it's possible that Lei looked at this position and thought, this looks tricky, because black certainly has some initiative here. In fact, this should be good for white, but you know, I'm looking at this position with a computer and it's telling me that white's king is safe, but only if you find some incredible moves. So for example, after bishop e4, the best move for white here is to create some space for the king and give up a pawn and then push the rook away. So these are very hard moves to find. So it's possible that she looked at that variation and thought, not sure about that. In any case, she took on f5, and that's a safer move, and bishop f3. And white is still better in this position. This is a good move from black. Exchanging off one of the bishops, even if it's potentially at the cost of a pawn. Of course, rook takes pawn, not possible here, because the bishop is hanging. Bishop b4, good move, because if rook takes pawn, white is still a bit better there, because the rook is looking to reach e7. Of course, rook e8 is a threat as well. So rook e8 played by Zhu. So level material at the moment. However, white has a little initiative. You know, it's possible to play f3 here to win a pawn using this. But I mean, I think this is a very hard position to win, actually. Just giving up that pawn and playing knight f6. If white's king were near in the middle, I think this would be different. But you know, this is quite tricky, actually. But Lei played, instead of going for it with f3, it's not clear it gives white a winning position. Instead, Lei played kind of a safer move, exchanging off bishop for knight, and then brought the king into the middle. White is still better here. Just because this is potentially a weak pawn. And here is perhaps the last chance for white to get some advantage. Although one can imagine with this weak pawn, the king also isn't bad. I think black should hold this. But anyway, the best try is rook c3, which covers the c file. And what's to come in here? And then rook c5. Now this is such a common theme in rook and pawn endgames. The rook reaches the 5th rank, which prevents black's king from advancing and allows white to continue potentially the squeeze by putting pawns on the 5th rank and just creeping forward. So still a little bit difficult for black to hold. But in the game, rook g3 played, and now the game fizzled out. b5 is a good move. That could have been played before, actually, because it turns this pawn into a target. Rook c8, threatening to take, so the king came across, and check. Now, the king really doesn't want to step back, so, and if king c3, then rook c8 check. So king e3, the rook came back to attack this one again, and now there was a liquidation of pawns like this, and very soon the players agreed to a draw. Let's just go to the end of the game, and there we are. Here the players agreed to draw. So I thought it was a very interesting first game. We see Lei playing something for her a little bit unusual, and I think this pawn sacrifice was very enterprising, actually. I think the only thing is that there's a kind of margin for error in this position. Even if it goes wrong for white, it's not that, it's not that serious, because white, it just has activity. And it's in this kind of position, it's really fine margins. When we got to this endgame, trying to squeeze an advantage is really very difficult. And I think both players made errors. Technically, I think, this was clearly black's best. And after that, yeah, this position, this was quite serious. Bishop b4 would have given white the advantage. Although, as I showed, it was potentially very, very tricky after that. So I can understand why Lei perhaps declined to go in for it. So a tense first round game, very typical of World Championship matches. In the next video, I'm going to show you game 2. Just to recap, it's a 12-game match. It's been played in China. The first half of the match is being held in Shanghai, and then it'll move to Chongqing for the second half of the match. So 12 games, classical time control. Do check out game 2. Thanks for watching.